Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Crockett for 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Whew, okay. Critical race theory. I just want to be clear. I'm going to go to the end real quick because I know that was brought up. Critical race theory, is that typically taught K through 12, yes or no?
No.
Okay, all right. So we can stop with the nonsense because K through 12 was not teaching critical race theory, at least in this country. I can't talk about what happens in other countries, but in our country, K through 12 is not learning critical race theory, just for those that are unfamiliar. In addition to that, we just heard about AFT and what they're advocating for. And I know that there was a comment that you made as relates to discipline. And how that's something AFT should be advocating for so that teachers can be safer. Is that correct? Am I characterizing what you said correctly?
I believe that both the NEA and the AFT should endorse policies that keep educators safe. Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you a quick question. Actually, I would like for all three of you to answer this question. It's just a yes or no. We'll start at this end. When you were growing up and going through school, did you ever have to go through an active shooter drill? Yes or no?
No.
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 Oh, okay. All right. So can we agree that guns being kept out of schools may be one of those things that could keep not only teachers safe, but also students safe? Yes or no?
Yes.
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 Okay. Thank you. So I do want to touch on a few things that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez talked about, because I don't really know the breadth of your understanding or experiences. But to give a little clarity to the district that I come from, 20% of my district live at or below poverty. And I do come from an urban district. I do have a majority minority district. I know that we've talked about DEI and diversity. And I find that when I'm here, I am constantly fighting to make sure that I can break through the noise and the stereotypes that exist around not only my kiddos in my district, but just my constituents. And one of the things that maybe some of you have never experienced, I don't know, is the fact that one of the leading reasons that students in my district don't show up to school is because they are poor, because some of them are homeless. We found that there were children that didn't go to school because they didn't have clean clothes. That is something that certain people don't have to worry about. And they found that if they brought in washing machines so that kids wouldn't make fun of them because they had clean clothes, that they would show up. These are things that maybe in a more affluent district, they may not need money for. So while one of my colleagues talked about how much investment has to go into some of these school districts in the inner city, I do want to make it clear that there are different obstacles that my kiddos deal with. In addition to the fact that I practiced criminal defense work prior to coming into the legislative realm. And in my district, I have the highest incarcerated zip codes in the entire state. What that means is that sometimes I have children that go home and they don't have parents to go home to. Or if they are going home to parents, their parents may be involved in things that aren't necessarily the best things for kids to be around. And so, as it's already been stated, sometimes the safest space is at school for some of these children. And what is so annoying to me is that we debate whether or not we will invest in our futures. As far as I'm concerned, there is no better investment than in our children. Because if we are going to make sure that this country continues on, it's not going to start by investing in people that look like me or of my age. It starts with making sure that there's a foundation. And I just want to say that I am thankful for those teachers that decided to go in, even when they were under-resourced, even given of their own resources, to make it happen. I lost teachers in my district during the pandemic because they literally risked their lives in the midst of a pandemic to show up because they love those kids that much, because I can tell you, the pay is not there. teachers aren't getting rich. Maybe professors, but not teachers. And so the fact is, I've talked to my school districts. They were able to take advantage of the extra money that was given to them, but guess what? They still had gaps that they needed to fill. And the reason that I brought up gun violence is, number one, it's a safety issue, but also as it relates to the mental health. Children nowadays know where they need to go in case somebody comes in. They're looking for the closet. That is no way for kids in America to live. So we need to make sure that we put kids first. Thank you so much, and with that, I will yield.
Thank you.
I now recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Congresswoman Crockett, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your time. There are a lot of things that you have been asked today, and you clearly have a lot on your plate. So I'm going to stick to one subject matter that is crucial to all families that House Democrats are committed to upholding in this Farm Bill: nutrition. At the USDA, you award billions of dollars annually to support the nutritional needs of Americans from all walks of life. I especially want to commend your repeated commitment across USDA leadership to supporting nutrition programs that serve all Americans regardless of their circumstances. But with so much on your plate, there are some things that can fall through the cracks. In particular, I'm referring to GusNIP and produce prescription programs. These programs provide critical assistance to Americans that need to stretch their SNAP dollars further and those that face medical complications from poor nutrition. But in each of these programs, not all fruits and vegetables are treated the same. Under current USDA policy, fresh fruits and vegetables receive more favorable consideration than frozen, despite the best science showing no nutritional difference. I'm concerned by this because we know that frozen is often better for folk that most need nutrition assistance because it keeps for longer and provides more variety. Now, I have no issue with fresh, so don't get me wrong, but if we want these programs to be accessible and be accessible for as many people as possible, we should have parity between fresh and frozen. That is why I introduced the Bipartisan SHOP Act with Congressman Alford, which now has 22 House co-sponsors and 4 supporters in the Senate. And if I recall correctly, when Congressman Rose asked you about the lack of parity on fresh and frozen in these programs last year, you said you would get back to us. So my question, Mr. Secretary, is whether you will commit to increasing equity in these programs by evaluating establishing parity between fresh and frozen fruits and vegetables in GusNIP and the produce prescription program.
Congresswoman, I'm happy to commit to encouraging those who use our nutrition programs to consider and to participate in fruit and vegetable consumption. I'd be more than happy to talk to you about what parity means and how it would act and react in terms of our prescription produce program, for example, where we're working with pediatricians and physicians, how it would work with our GusNIP program, where we essentially provide resources, how it would work at farmers markets, where it probably wouldn't because it's mostly fresh fruit and vegetable. There isn't any frozen vegetables available. So when you promote a farmer's market, are you suggesting we not promote the farmer's market because it doesn't have frozen?
No, what I would say is that I have a district where 20% of my district live at or below poverty. And because of that, my district probably in a disproportionate way is in more need of access to fruits and vegetables. But what we typically see is in underserved communities, they don't necessarily have the big grocers. So I have so many food deserts in my district. And so what happens is they don't necessarily always have grocery stores. And if they do have grocery stores, those grocery stores don't necessarily have fresh fruits and veggies. So if it's a matter of I can use my SNAP benefits so that I can get fresh broccoli, but the only place that I can go to maybe is the convenience store that's down the street, and the convenience store has frozen broccoli, why is it that I can't go to the convenience store? What's going to happen is I am now put into a situation where I now have to go to an area in which they have fresh fruits and veggies instead of being able to use.
I'm more than happy to work with you on that issue. That's a slightly different issue and has slightly different responses. One is basically taking a look at what convenience stores have to offer in order to be able to qualify for the SNAP program. The other aspect of this is how we might be able to use the Healthy Food Financing Initiative that supports corner stores creating broader access to healthier foods, how we might be able to work together to make sure that frozen vegetables are part of what they are able to provide.
And I thank you for that. I use that as just a general example, but overall, even if it's another grocery store, I would want people to be able to choose frozen because some of those grocery stores don't necessarily have, I would say, the most appetizing fresh food sometimes. But I'm going to move on to another issue that is specifically super important to Texas, and that is the summer EBT program. For whatever reason, my home state of Texas is having some problems standing that up, and I would like if you could update me on what other states are refusing to feed children during the summertime.
There are 14 states, and we'll get you a list. Nebraska just recently decided to come into the program, so there are 14 states.
Thank you.
Unserious hearing is a waste of our time and our resources. I yield with that, and I yield the remainder of my time to Representative Crockett.
Yes, I just want to make sure that I point out, and this is not a question, just in case you wanted to know, that on page 174 of your transcribed interview, line 9, it says, "This is an absolute lie," in reference to talking about the FBI. What you stated,
I did not call the
what was
FBI
stated
agents
right
liars.
before that was,
I
first
said
of all,
they
I
misstated
said that I'm
or made
speaking, and I did not
mistakes.
ask you a question. First of all, it doesn't say Tony Bobulinski told the FBI. This is a summary of 2 agents that took notes through my interview, and their summary apparently that they presented says Bobulinski first met in person with members of the Biden family at a 2017 meeting in Miami, Florida. This is an absolute lie. That is what it says. The final thing that I'm going to say is about this. What we have from Kim Buck, a Republican. I don't think that the impeachment of Biden is appropriate, and so House Speaker Mike Johnson's ability to talk me into staying here is going to be about as successful as his ability about talking me into an unconstitutional impeachment.
I'll let her have 30 seconds over. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burchett from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Galanis, I just want one last question. I'm going to show you a draft email that you provided to the committee. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Objection on time. Good job. Chair now recognizes Ms. Crockett for 1 minute, or 5 minutes.
1 minute. All right. First of all, Mr. Bobulinski, do you know who Elections LLC is? Yeah.
Mike.
Well, it's not a who.
Okay. Well, do you know what it is?
Yes, it's a LLC.
Okay. And is it the LLC that your attorney works for?
I believe so, yes.
You believe so. Okay. So at this point in time, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a document indicating that the law firm representing Tony Bobulinski was paid $10,000 as recently as January of this year by the Save America PAC, which you may recognize as Donald Trump's PAC.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, so far in this hearing, it has felt like the worst episode of The Apprentice. I'm sure you're familiar with that show. It seems like my colleagues and maybe you and some others are trying to become the next vice president of the United States of America. You're auditioning or something like that because, Mr. Bobulinski, I know that you take exception to the fact that your credibility has been called into question over and over. But when someone comes to testify under oath, whether it's before this committee, behind closed doors, or in person, then we have to evaluate someone's credibility. And, sir, I definitely have always had issues with your credibility, as I know that you are very well aware of. So let me remind you of what happened behind closed doors.
Well, you should ask Ro Khanna about my credibility.
I haven't asked you a question. Okay?
You are?
When I haven't. So when I ask you a question, that's when you answer. Otherwise, I'm talking. So,
excuse me?
With my time, because it's my time, I want to be clear that when we were behind closed doors, you called a number of people liars. You called the Wall Street Journal liars. You called Cassidy Hutchinson a liar. You called the FBI a liar. You called Rob Walker a liar. You called James Gilliar a liar. You called Hunter Biden a liar. You called Jim Biden a liar. And just today, you added to your list, you called my colleague, Congressman Mr. Goldman, a liar as well. It seems like, according to you, the only person that's telling the truth is you and everyone else is lying. But I want to move on to something else.
Is that a question?
It's
or?
not a question.
Oh, okay.
You'll know when I ask you a question, I promise.
Thank you.
So, the other thing that I want to talk about is the fact that my colleague from the other side of the aisle talked about the company that we keep. And she wanted to go through a list of people that she felt like were bad company, because right now the majority has been relying upon the testimony of someone who's currently sitting in federal prison. And we know that your company is the company of somebody who's been found liable of fraud, as well as defamation, as well as sexual assault, and for whatever reason can't pay his bills at this point in time. But I'm going to ask Mr. Parnas, so this is a question to him. Are you aware if Trump had any associates that have been found guilty of anything?
Yes, lots of them.
Lots of them.
Me included.
You included. Okay, so when you were called here to testify, you weren't called here to testify for any other reason than to tell the truth. Is that correct?
Yes, Congresswoman.
Now, we started this whole sham off because of the 1023, and that was debunked by you, was it not?
Yes, Congresswoman.
Way before we started this impeachment inquiry. And you mentioned a number of times this guy by the name of Rudy Giuliani.
Yes.
Now, you know, everybody is so stressed about the fact that Hunter ain't here today. But, you know, Hunter came and testified behind closed doors for over 6 hours. And every single one of them, they weren't limited to 5 minutes. They could ask whatever they wanted to. And there's a full transcript of his testimony. So I don't know what else they wanted to do besides the fact that they wanted to put on a show. But let me tell you something. This whole thing is based upon something that Giuliani came up with.
Yes.
And we tried to subpoena him that's what I remember. If anybody else remember, we asked, we said, hey, we should subpoena Giuliani. But, you know, kind of like when we were trying to get his cell phone, they shut it down, right? Like, they don't want the facts. But you would agree with me that considering the fact that you were working under Rudy Giuliani at the time that you went over to Ukraine, that he has maybe some valuable information that he could offer this committee as to whether or not there's anything that we should be investigating in the first place.
Absolutely, Congresswoman. I wish that this committee would subpoena Rudy Giuliani, put him under oath alongside me to get to the bottom of the truth of what actually happened in Ukraine and to the manipulation that Trump and Giuliani and the team went to do.
I agree with you, but somehow it doesn't look like we're going to get there, and I thank you for your time. With that, I'll yield.
Time's expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Galanis, on May 9th, 2014, you received an email from Devin Archer confirming.
Recognizes Ms. Crockett from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Dr. Califf, thank you so much for being here. You know, you are a brave man. I don't know who would want to sign up for your job, especially in a time in which it seems like we don't believe in science, or we don't know what data is, or we just gonna ignore it. I'm not really sure. I don't know how long you were asked about ivermectin. And let me tell you something. I don't know if you've ever testified in court, but you will be a great witness because you refused to answer the way that he wanted you to, which would have been, again, putting out misinformation. Because I do want to do a quick level set on something, and I don't know how we continue to come back to this, but let me just ask you a few questions. Was COVID-19 real?
Yes, I had it myself twice. I think twice, once or twice.
Did people die?
Just in the U.S. alone, over 1 million people. It was in the top 3 causes of death for many months. And I had friends, you know, I was an intensive care unit doctor. When I came to FDA, I stopped practicing, but my friends in ICUs were overwhelmed. Hospitals had to have trucks backing up to the hospital because there wasn't enough room for all the dead people.
And did vaccines save lives?
Yes, thank you for asking that again. People that are up to date on their vaccines have a significantly lower risk of being dead or admitted to an intensive care unit compared to those who are not up to date on the vaccine. And the worst of all are people not vaccinated at all. That's true on the individual level. If you look at counties in the U.S., the counties with a higher vaccination rate have lower death rates from COVID. If you look at countries, you see the same general relationship. So the vaccines have been highly effective.
Thank you so much.
Not
for that.
perfect, but highly effective.
I understand. I don't know that there is any perfection. I know that there's none in this chamber. Nevertheless, as a result of an administration that believes in science and data, we now have ARPA-H, which ARPA stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. And my district, luckily, was the recipient of an ARPA-H customer service customer experience centers. And I'm so excited because this means that as we are looking at trials, as we're looking at diversifying them, we will have a great opportunity right there in Texas 30. It is a huge investment in science to make sure that we can save lives. And when the next pandemic arrives, we will actually be prepared and have science so that we can stay on top of this. Because the last time I checked, and doctor, correct me if I'm wrong, having a leader suggest that we should inject bleach. Are you aware of anyone being cured of COVID-19 because they injected bleach into their body?
I am unaware of any such thing. If I might comment in general, and this relates back to the discussion about ivermectin. I came along when heart attacks, no one knew what caused a heart attack. That was what I focused on. We tried 100 different things for the treatment of heart attack. Only a couple of them worked, the others didn't. And the only reason we knew what worked is we went from the idea to doing a well-conducted study, a randomized trial. And then, if it worked, then all the practitioners began to adopt it and use it. So we now treat heart attacks by going to the cath lab, opening the artery, and some medicines that work. Ivermectin has been studied multiple times in randomized trials, no benefit. But it is highly effective for the treatment. I use the word worms as a generic term for the kinds of infections that typically occur in places like Asia that can be devastating. It got a Nobel Prize because it's effective for those, and it's been a lifesaver, but it's been ineffective in COVID.
I completely understand. The last area that I'm going to touch on in my last 45 seconds, because I am a woman out of the state of Texas, there's no way that I am going to have a conversation and not talk about reproductive access. So out of curiosity, would you consider the medical management of a miscarriage to be potentially a life-saving usage? Yes or no?
I have to decline to answer that because
that is
it's
perfectly
under
fine.
adjudication by the Supreme Court.
That is perfectly fine. I'm gonna tell you yes, but I'm gonna give you another question that you can answer. Would you consider erectile dysfunction as a life-saving usage for Viagra?
Not life-saving.
Not life-saving. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you that based on my research, that mifepristone actually has life-saving characteristics, yet Viagra doesn't. And for those that don't know, Viagra, from my understanding, is actually nearly 10 times greater as it relates to risk of death. Yet for some reason, it's not sitting in the court right now. And I do appreciate the fact that you laid out that when it comes down to getting drugs approved, they actually go through trials. It's not just randomness. You take the randomness, you then say, maybe there's some evidence here, and then you put it through the ringer. After putting it through the ringer for decades, women's lives have been saved. And as a representative from the area that Roe v. Wade actually initiated, I am appalled because for whatever reason, some people want us to go back to horse and buggy in this country. And I think since now maybe we have the internet, maybe we should take advantage of it. And we shouldn't say that we should remain in the times of horse and buggy. And so with that, thank you for the work that the FDA does. I respect your research. I recognize that the courts don't do research. I also recognize that this chamber seemingly doesn't care about research. But because of the work that you do, there are lives that are being saved, and I need you to be funded to the fullest extent to make sure that we can continue to save American lives. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. LaTurner from.
Well done. Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Texas recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. This is so interesting. A couple of things. I'm just curious to know, as we're talking about lawyers and the obligations of lawyers, and whether or not maybe the former president has any idea of what good lawyer obligations look like. I'm just going to ask, we're not going to play, we're going to do Ms. Winebanks. Have you heard of any of these lawyers? I've got Robert Cheeley, Kenneth Chesborough, Jeffrey Clark, Matthew DePerno, John Eastman, Jenna Ellis, Michael Farino, Rudy Giuliani, Julia Halia. I got a long list. Have you heard of any of these people?
I have.
Are you aware as to whether or not any of them have faced criminal penalties?
Yes, and also been disbarred or suspended.
Oh, yeah, okay. So they've had some issues, but these are the hand-picked lawyers for Trump. I'm assuming that y'all have never been Trump lawyers, Mr. Trustee or Mr. Costello.
No, I was for a year.
Oh, you were, and you still have your bar card?
I'm sorry?
You still have your bar card?
Yeah, well, unless I get targeted for daring to represent a former president.
You have absolutely done a lot better than most that deal with him. So good for you. I also want to make sure that we talk about what two-tier really looks like. And Mr. Trustee, since you've been a prosecutor before, I'm curious to know, have you ever had a criminal defendant that had over 80 counts in 4 different jurisdictions and somehow was not held pretrial? I know that you talked in your opening about your interpretation of what speedy trial looks like, and it's really only for those that are held pretrial. And last time I checked, most of the time those people held pretrial, they don't have anywhere near 80 counts pending against them. But I'm curious to know, in your experience, have you ever had someone that had over 80 counts pending in 4 different jurisdictions and they were not held pretrial? Yes or no?
Well, no specific recall,
Okay, all
but
right.
I could answer
That's all
more if you'll let me.
You told me no, and I understand because I hadn't either. So, in addition to that, there's been a gag order, since we're going to talk about the pending trial that's going on right now. Have you ever had a defendant that violated a gag order and then you went to the judge and the judge didn't lock them up and they done it at least 10 times? I think it's 10. I'm losing count right now. Have you ever had somebody violate?
In 35 years, I had never seen a defendant gagged.
Okay, not my question. So you've never.
Well, it's
had
hard
it.
to get to the second
So you've
part
never,
if they're never
you've
gagged.
never had it. You're absolutely right. All right. So finally, when it comes down to intimidating witnesses, because maybe you haven't had gag orders, intimidating witnesses, have you ever had a defendant that you were prosecuting and they were intimidating witnesses and they didn't somehow end up in the clank for at least a day or two?
I've had criminal death penalty prosecutions based on witness retaliation. I'm very familiar with gang cases and mafia cases. Most of those defendants were already incarcerated when they would orchestrate some sort of obstruction.
Okay.
If there's provable physical violence-based obstruction, it certainly makes sense that they'd be incarcerated.
Thank you so much. And, you know, Mr. Hamilton, I don't want you to feel left out of this conversation. So I'm going to make sure I ask you some questions. Let me know if you're having problems answering them, because they really should be yes or no. Let's see, you're the executive director for the America First Legal, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and America First Legal is a member of Project 2025, which is dedicated to creating the playbook for the next conservative administration and what it calls the Project Pillars, correct?
We are proud contributors to Project 2025.
Okay, and are you familiar with Project 2025's mandate for leadership?
In fact, I am.
Okay. And in fact, you wrote some of the sections of this mandate related to the DOJ, correct?
Sure did.
And the mandate outlines policy priorities for the next conservative president. Is that correct?
It does.
You've done a great job. I just want to let you know. All right, so let's walk through some of the provisions of the mandate. It calls for eliminating the Department of Education, eliminating the Department of Commerce, deploying the military for the use of domestic law enforcement against protesters under the Insurrection Act of 1807. It also has the repealing of Schedule F status for thousands of federal employees to allow a president to replace career civil servants with unqualified partisan loyalists. That's probably my favorite of it.
It also prohibits the FBI from combating the spread of misinformation and disinformation, like Russia and China, who are actively trying to interfere with American elections. I don't know why or how anybody can support Project 2025. And I know that there was allegedly a joke about dictators and whether or not that's funny, but in the United States of America, dictatorships are never funny, and Project 2025 is giving the playbook for authoritarianism as well as the next dictator to come in. And I know that you are doing your jobs here by making sure that hopefully some juror turns on and finds some viral moment of you spewing more of the nonsense as it relates to the president. But as practicing lawyers or licensed attorneys, I hope that we can all agree that no one gets indicted because someone says so. There takes a grand jury, and the grand jury is comprised of American citizens that sit down and review evidence, and they make the determination. And when and if Trump is convicted, it will be a jury of his peers, and it won't be the President of the United States.
I thought you were going to get to a question somewhere in that 90 seconds for Mr. Hamilton after you went after his 2025. I will point out the Inspector General just released a report that said the FBI retaliated against whistleblowers. One of the reasons we do need some changes, but there was no question there. But Mr. Hamilton, if you want to give it some kind of response, you're more than welcome to do that.
Mr. Chairman, my only response would be to say that there are a great number of policy options that have been provided to any future conservative administration through Project 2025, and it's an attempt to restore the rule of law in this country. And I reject the Huffington Post-style characterizations of the recommendations.
All right. The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from, we'll go to the gentlelady from Wyoming, then the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chair, I'd ask
Thank you.
unanimous consent.
Excuse me, this is, oh.
I'll get you as soon as we go after this day. Just
Okay.
unanimous consent?
Yes, just unanimous consent to enter the mandate for leadership.
Without objection. Without objection. The gentleman.
Crockett from Texas.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And let me just pick up where my colleague from Tennessee left off. Director Cheadle, was the incident on July 13th due to DEI, or rather systemic failures in communication and potentially safety protocols?
The incident on the 13th has nothing to do with DEI. The incident on the 13th has to do with a failure or a gap either in planning or communication.
Thank you so much. In fact, I have a few articles that I will enter into the record once I wrap up that actually acknowledge a number of women specifically for their valor in their service, whether it's been in various levels of law enforcement. But, you know, I want to stick here for just a second, because earlier you had a conversation in which there was a discussion about training. And I want to talk about training, and I want to talk about the fact that there's been a little bit of dancing around as it relates to this being a suspicious person and this being a situation that was perceived to be a threat. And it seems as if there's a different analysis that takes place. One of my questions has to do with if you have any bias training that your officers undergo. And the reason that I ask that, because as a civil rights lawyer, I have learned so many times in having to deal with law enforcement that there usually is not a perception of a threat when it is a young white male, even if they are carrying a long gun. Yet a lot of times, at least in this country, when it comes to law enforcement, there is a perceived threat just by somebody having a little bit more melanin in their skin. So I'm curious to know, because a lot of times, one of the things that we have consistently pushed for on my side of things, and when I say my side, is once we are looking at a tragedy in which law enforcement made an error, is the bias training and whether or not our officers are getting it. So I'm curious to know, in some of the training that you talk about that is part of your budget, has bias training been part of that?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. I know that today is a rough day, and on that day in Pennsylvania, it was a rough day. And the reality is that I understand it, and you may or may not know the answer to this question. In the space in which this event took place, it was an open carry space. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So I hail from the state of Texas, and interestingly enough, I was serving in the State House right after there was a mass shooting in El Paso. We had an opportunity to do right by our citizens in Texas, but we did not. Instead, they passed permitless carry. And what my colleagues kept trying to get you to answer, because we want to come up with solutions, we don't want to keep pointing the finger. And right now, you've got a bunch of fingers that are pointed at you. But our job is to solve problems for the American people. And to be perfectly honest, the numbers are clear. I think almost every major law enforcement agency come forward and say that they were against permitless carry because they said that their jobs would be made more difficult. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the state of Texas decided that they would ignore those warnings, and they passed the law instead. And right after they passed that law, we ended up with Uvalde. And we heard the stories of those officers that were scared to go in and save those babies because of the firearm in that case, 18-year-old had in his hands. They also were given an opportunity to say, hey, raise the age and make it to where at least you have to be 21 before you can possess this type of weapon. And they chose not to. And we have the facts. It shows, and I'll enter this into the record as well if there is no objection, deaths from firearms keep climbing in Texas decades after lawmakers began weakening gun regulations. That is from the Texas Tribune.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much. The last thing that I'm just going to make a point of saying is that we all care about this issue because we know that there has been a spike in violence, political violence in this country. Are you aware of the fact that the numbers are higher right now?
Yes.
Okay. In addition to that, and I'm going to point a little blame at ourselves because right now you got all the fingers pointed at you. But the reality is that we have a number of congressional members that are consistently engaging in violent rhetoric, and it needs to be toned down. The reality is that people are listening and they're paying attention, but unfortunately, another thing that is happening because we're not getting answers from you today is the conspiracy theories. They have already began. Have you heard of any of the conspiracies?
Yes.
Okay. The problem with these conspiracies is that when people believe that, say, the President of the United States ordered a hit, or they believe it was an inside job, or whatever conspiracies they believe because they don't have any facts in front of them, that potentially incites the next level of violence at the next event in retaliation for this. So we are only begging for your job as it relates to being the director, as well as the men and women that you are protecting as their director, that you keep them safe by making sure that the American people have the information that they need so that they can feel as if Secret Service is on the side of the American people. And ma'am, I don't doubt that Secret Service is on the side of the American people. But right now, so long as these conspiracy theories continue to fester, it is going to make your job that much harder. Thank you so much, and I yield.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cheadle, I'd like.
Go ahead.
I would just say that improper payments includes underpayments, so the 10% could also include underpayments.
Oh, but, oh, okay. Yeah. Got what you're saying. So we're saying that there's potentially. Okay, so my question is this. If we had to tie down, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine, because literally I'm just going here because I just was surprised by the number. If I had to tie down how much money we're losing specifically as it relates to fraud, do we have a number for that?
So we did an estimate of losses related to fraud based on 2018 to 2022 data.
Okay.
And we estimate that the range is between $233 and $521 billion annually.
Okay. And my next question is, because I don't have this information, so if you don't, that's okay as well. As it relates to recommendations around technology, there have been a lot of conversations around basically upgrading, doing something different, basically moving us forward instead of kind of sticking to the old way. Do we have estimates or proposals or requests that have been made by any agency as it relates to what it would cost us to go ahead and put in the technology that would be most helpful?
I am not aware of an estimate.
Yeah, I'm not aware of an estimate, and I think one of the challenges, Congresswoman, is what you and others have talked about here, which is agencies aren't incentivized necessarily to come forward with that number. and to focus on fixing this problem, which is why I think this hearing's been so valuable.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say this right now. I'm charging all of y'all to go and get me some numbers, because at the end of the day, the American people are relying upon us, especially those of us that sit on oversight, to actually be watchdogs over their tax dollars. And so I really hate to leave a situation where we've had lots of good, feel-good conversations and we have no solutions. And so most technology costs money. For instance, we've had oversight hearings as it relates to issues with Department of Defense who cannot pass their audits, and at least we're getting estimates on what the cost would be. I at least would like to say that we have had that information before us, because none of us, and I'm maybe being presumptuous, sitting up here have the expertise to know what it is that you need to make sure that these agencies are going to be able to better do their jobs. And the reason that I asked for the numbers is because I could guess, this is just a guesstimate, that whatever the technology cost, it is less than $233 to $521 billion a year. That's just my guess, but I could be wrong. And I am here to provide some sort of solutions. In addition to that, you know, I appreciate this hearing because, number one, we're acknowledging that there's a problem. That's a good start for us specifically here in Congress to agree on that. But one of the issues that I have is kind of this blind eye that we sometimes turn, because as we are in election season, and there's definitely a candidate that said that he's just going to get rid of fraud in his first 6 months. You know, I don't know what kind of wizardry he has going on to be able to snap his fingers and get rid of anything in 6 months. But I would like real solutions, because the talking is not getting us anywhere. It's my understanding that if we go back a few years, back to 2013, I believe the number was, the number as it relates to this particular conversation was down at 35 billion. Yeah, back in 2003. The number was 35 billion, and now we are truly just going through the roof. And again, as we are hearing the conversations around how the American people are struggling, we need to do something better about the monies that we are getting in so that we can then move on to help people that need help, such as those that are relying on SNAP benefits and things like that. So I appreciate any assistance that y'all can provide, and maybe the next proposed budgets, y'all can put in something for technology upgrades to help and assist all agencies that need the help and assistance to make sure that we can start to rein this in. Thank you so much, and I yield.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Crockett from Texas.
Thank you so much. You know what, this hearing is actually the best example of what waste, fraud, and abuse looks like, because the only reason we're having this hearing is because somebody got their feelings hurt in a debate, and I don't understand why we're wasting taxpayer dollars. Next time, tell your big boy to show up and be ready to handle the woman in the room who hopefully will become the next president of the United States. Nevertheless, while we do have two amazing authors from Project 2025, which it seems like everybody got the memo, like, yes, I'm going to double down and say it's my thing, but I'm going to make sure I also say that it ain't our homeboys thing, because we know that it doesn't poll very well with the American people, because the American people are woke enough to recognize that there is nothing good in it for them. So with that being said, Ms. Perryman, I'm just curious, and this is yes or no. Is Trump's name ever mentioned in Project 2025? Yes or no? Just yes or no. I got you. I got you.
Within the document itself,
yes.
There are a number of references to the former administration.
So is Trump's name mentioned just one time?
I believe it's mentioned more.
Okay. 5 times.
I haven't counted.
Oh, okay. Well, if I told you that his name is mentioned approximately 312 times, would you have any reason to dispute that?
I don't have any reason.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's interesting that we want to try to pretend. We're not going to pretend in here. We're going to work with facts and not fiction. So I also want to talk about inflation really quickly with you, Ms. Perryman, because we've talked about it a lot. I'm just curious to know, is the inflation that we just struggled through, was that global or was that limited to the United States?
Global.
Global.
seemingly it was attached to this thing called the global pandemic. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't just the United States.
No.
Okay, so it wasn't just a matter of the Biden-Harris administration in the United States is struggling, right?
I think the United States actually fared better than the rest of the world.
Oh, yeah. In fact, we are, correct?
I think so, yeah.
All right, but inflation still hurts, and so that's why we have a candidate that has an actual plan instead of concepts of a plan. Or as I like to say, Trump only has offered concepts of constitutionality mixed with coordinations of a coup. But nevertheless, we're going to move on. I want to talk about the internet really quickly because we wanted to talk about the internet. Actually, let me talk about the border real fast, and then we can talk about Texas in this way. I'd ask for unanimous consent to emit this article from The Hill that says, Trump says, blame it on me if border bill fails.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to move on to the internet, and I'm actually going to talk about Texas because I believe that the testimony has been somewhere around the fact that no money has actually been disputed as it relates to rural broadband. I'd also ask for unanimous consent to admit this article from the USDA.gov. USDA officials attend groundbreaking to expand high-speed internet access in rural Texas, dated March 7th, 2024, Italy, Texas.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much.
With respect, that was not the testimony.
Oh, I thought you said no dollars had been spent.
The largest single program.
My question is, did you not say
$42 billion.
Okay.
0 houses have been connected. There are other federal programs, including Trump-era ones, that right now are turning dirt and connecting.
Okay, so just to be clear, because I don't want the American people to be confused, because I was confused, because it almost seemed as if, considering the fact the name of this hearing is the failed policies, as if nothing had been done. But to clarify for those that are watching, you aren't saying that no dollars have been spent as it relates to rural broadband dollars under the Infrastructure Act, correct?
To be clear, for the signature effort, $42
yes
billion,
or no? Have any dollars been spent?
not a
$1.
single person has been connected. There's
That's not my question, though. My
but they
question
have their
was,
own
have
sets
any
of issues. Senator Ted Cruz from
Okay,
Texas
I'm
put out
going to
a
move on.
report
I'm going to
that
move
showed
on.
that
I'm reclaiming my time at this point.
many of these
I'm
bills, it's
reclaiming my time, which means, Chairman, I'm going
$100,000
to
per
ask
location.
you to stop my time because the witness is not.
Are you asking him a question, or are you
No, I'm
reclaiming
not
the
asking
time?
him a question. I reclaim my time.
All right. The chair recognizes Ms. Crockett.
Okay, now I was at 41, y'all, so go back up.
We'll give
I
you
was
9
watching-
more seconds.
Okay, thank you so much. Here's the deal. You've testified a lot about the problem with the broadband rollout being diversity, equity, and inclusion. You said DEI, I don't know how many times, which is one of the issues that Project 2025 takes issue with. But it's interesting to me because I have another article from the Texas Tribune, and it actually specifically states that internet providers say they are simultaneously hopeful and skeptical about whether the incoming federal dollars will be enough to connect the most underserved Texans. Historically, other federal rural broadband funding programs have seen limited success because many companies who committed to providing broadband went into default after radically underestimating their cost. It doesn't say anything about diversity. And the final thing that I will say
Do you
is
know why
that
those
this
costs have
election,
increased so
I didn't ask you a
substantially?
question. The final thing that I will say is that this election is the best example of why y'all are so afraid of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because then you can't have a simple-minded, underqualified white man somehow end up ascending. Instead, you've got to pay attention to the qualified black woman that is on the other side. And with that, I will yield.
Gentlelady yields. Chair.
Gentleman yields back his time. Does gentlewoman seek time?
Yes.
Gentlewoman, Ms. Crockett is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be honest and tell you that most of my constituents aren't particularly interested in the finer points of federal financial auditing. But what they do care about is whether their taxpayer dollars are being wasted, whether our military is ready to take on the next threat, and whether our military can continue to keep us and our allies safe. Unfortunately, we're seeing right now what happens when DOD fails to maintain good accounting of its federal funds and government-funded property. A few weeks ago, the DOD Office of Inspector General issued a report claiming that, quote, DOD did not effectively or efficiently implement accountability controls for items delivered to Taiwan from November 2023 through March of 2024. It continued noting that, quote, 2.7 million rounds of ammunition from the DoD, including some that was expired in a mix of original, loose, and incorrect packaging. This is to say nothing more of more than the 340 of 504, or 67% of the total pallets sent over were water damaged, resulting in other things, including moldy body armor. And I'm gonna just pause here really quickly because we just had a larger hearing earlier today that was talking about the threats of the PRC and the idea that we continue to say that we support Taiwan and we stand with them. And then because of our own failures, we are unable to support those that we are trying to help at the same time that we are casting dispersions on this real threat that China presents is problematic, not to mention these are items that essentially could have been necessary for our own protection. These are items that came out of our own stores. And so it doesn't instill the most confidence, but also just the amount of money that was lost. My district, 20% live at or below poverty. So when they are paying taxes that a lot of them really can't afford in the first place because they need every single dime, it is hard to hear numbers like this and know that literally the amount of money that we send over to DoD are amounts of money that most of us will never see in our bank accounts in a lifetime. It's a problem. But we also know that there are real threats, as we know that the temperature around the world is a little high right now. And as we are attempting to be good allies, we need to do just that and be good allies. And this is one of the easiest ways that we can start, is by making sure that we are holding ourselves accountable for the money that we're spending. DoD's failure to account for and properly oversee its weapons and property funded by taxpayers in my district and across the country is an understatement. National and international security today increasingly relies on good technology, solid record keeping, and cutting-edge data analytics. And every dollar lost to fraud, waste, or abuse means the American people get a less efficient and effective military. Mr. Khan, yes or no? From your experience, can better financial management at DoD improve agency decision-making to better protect our national security and the security of our allies?
Yes.
Now, going back to the DoD report, the Inspector General stated that because of DoD's failures, our government ended up spending an additional, quote, $618,000 in labor and materials to clean and dry wet and moldy body armor, and $113,000 to replace damaged body armor delivered to Taiwan. This is to say nothing of the additional costs incurred to replace the unusable munitions sent over, which again was sent over in incorrect packaging. How is DoD supposed to pass an audit if it's supposedly sending arms and weapons to our friends and allies with the wrong label? A sixth of our total federal budget goes to DoD. And to be clear, I am not underestimating the vital work of the department's mission in protecting our national security and the security of our allies, but it's because of the vital role DoD plays in our lives that Americans demand accountability. The people need to know that if a crisis happens, DoD can protect us and our allies in worst-case scenarios. And to do this, DoD must have a successful audit. Mr. Khan, how long has the Department of Defense's financial management been on GAO's high-risk list?
It's been around 30 years.
And why is DoD's financial management of GAO's high-risk list? Why is it on the list? Sorry.
Because of pervasive internal control weaknesses that prevent accountability of their assets and the budget they've been provided by the Congress.
Thank you. Has DoD's leadership improved the department's financial management in ways that could get it off of the GAO high-risk list?
Yes, I mean, the high-risk list has got 5 criteria. One of the ones, probably the most important, is leadership. That's where they have met the criteria. Tone at the top is very important for remediating the other 4 areas.
Thank you. Although DoD as a whole has yet to achieve a clean audit, 10 of its 29 components passed their audits with clean opinions in FY 2023. While this is nowhere near where DoD needs to be, the progress is promising. DoD must use the success in these components for the remaining areas needing improvement. Can I ask one last question, Mr. Chair? Okay. In fact, Mr. Steffens, just so we have it on record, what are some of the lessons or best practices from the 10 successful components at DoD that can be shared agency-wide?
Sure, thank you for the question. I believe there's a number of lessons learned that we have. Most recently, obviously, from the Marine Corps. We just talked about this tone at the top. The example that General Smith at the time was the Assistant Commandant set in holding his leaders accountable is vitally important, and we talked about through several of you today. Secondly, the important thing in the Marine Corps, too, is breaking down the stovepipes amongst systems, the acquisition systems and our financial systems, making sure there is free flow of data, the correct data, and the data in the right configurations so a transaction can flow through the purchasing system, through the financial system is very important. We learned from that. But aside from the Marine Corps, and also I think with the Marine Corps, too, is having a very modern, capable enterprise resource planning system, or ERP, in the form of the Defense Agency's initiative system, which they adopted here several years ago, just recently, and it shows that the systems matter, right? So aside from the Marine Corps, I'll go to the Army Corps of Engineers, only because I served as their CFO there for 6 years, and we've had clean audit opinions, to your point. Standardization is so important. Standardization among entities. Let's establish the policy and have all those organizations do it correctly. Now, I will tell you, in the Corps, maybe it was a little bit easier with 44 districts that could operate the same way. It's a little more challenging in the military departments because you have such a differentiation in missions amongst those various commands. But nonetheless, the standardization has to be important, has to be enforced. So those are a couple examples of things that we have learned from Marine Corps, Army Corps of Engineers, and then working closely with your service provider. I think we've learned here recently from organizations that the working capital funds from Defense Information Systems Agency, the partnership you have with the service provider, being vocal, good exchange on what they can provide for you, and DFAS has done that, is also a good example, ma'am.
Thank you so much. With that, I'll yield.